Hello everyone, this is Defense Politics Asia and this is the conclusions. So another chill session of the conclusions where I share my opinions and just general major things that's currently happening in the Ukraine war. So the Russians are still on a major offensive. The Ukrainians seems to be running out of their capability to actually launch a counteroffensive. There are still some limited ones, which I'll cover. Basically, the only ones that I understood is over in the Pokrov front, where the Ukrainians was reported to be attacking Uzbenivka. So this is the only one that I have where the Ukrainians are actually on the offensive. Otherwise, the Russians are on the major push all across the grounds. And in the past 12 hours, so if you have watched the frontline changes report, you have known that this past 2 days doesn't seem to have a lot of frontline changes. However, the past 12 hours since the last frontline changes report, there's a lot more frontline changes that was noted. And so I will not cover frontline changes per se, but I just want to show you that the Russians are doing offensive, and one of them is actually over at the Pokrov front. And the Russians are, of course, as usual, are pushing literally everywhere in the Pokrov region. There's my arrow. The Russians are pushing, in Alexandropil, Kalinove, Vydany Druhi, the Shelt Ekonomiczny, towards Minograd, Lysivka, Shevchenko, Pokrov, Vilfrove, Kotline, Udashne, towards Sahievka, towards, I forgot what's that place, and then Uzbenivka, Novosahievka, Kotlярivka, that's Stripne, Bodanivka, Preobrazhenka, Orkove. Wow, that is a test of my memory. So you can see it's rather crazy. And there is a few frontline changes that was noted that basically at Lysivka. Ukrainian mapping shows the Russian forces have taken the eastern part, and we have geolocation of Russian forces in the north. Tentatively, our mapping is very conservative. There's a high chance that the Russians have already taken all of this. The entire, this area here might actually already entirely under Russian control. But of course, we try to be conservative about it. So no, there's still this Ukrainian impossible salient around here. But the Ukraine likely is only on the western part of Lysivka. There is another major update is over at Shevchenko as well. Russian forces now at the entrance of Shevchenko. However, this does not necessarily mean that the Russians have captured all these Ukrainian incursions previously, or the grounds taken by the Ukrainians. So, but the Russians are pushing in this sector. So this area continued to be very offensive by the Russians. And over just next door, over in this region, the Russians seems to be focusing a lot on Kalinove. So this comes after the Russians capturing Alexandropil and Pentelemenivka. The Russians are now pushing north. I think Veletenivka is already gone case. The Russians are now pushing Sukabalka, and it looks like this strategic situation in this sector is encouraging the Russians to now push for Kalinove. This operation seems to be a bit more intense than previously. The reports from both sides talking about Kalinove. For a long time, Kalinove have nothing. Like, if you look at the previous reports, there was not much things. Prior there's like October, there's only 2 reports. November 1 report, December 1 report. It's like it was a pretty neglected front, and it's not being activated because of the situation over at this New York sector, this part of the New York sector. So we will continue to monitor the situation here. The Thorax, nothing really much to talk about because everything is shrouded in mystery. Nobody really know what the hell is happening there. And then in Andriivka, the Russians are also still pushing. The attempt to push for Oleksievka doesn't seem to have worked out. I think the Ukrainians have a very strong line around here, so this will take a long time to break. Some major offensive areas is, of course, the Zaporizhia front region. The Russians are pushing very heavily in this sector, and we have the reports of fighting at Palivka. usually we put it as shelling, but because of the Russians' claim to have captured Mali Shebaki and Shebaki, if this is the front line, then an attack to Palivka is now open. The road is open. The battles are still being reported in Mali Shebaki and Shebaki according to the information from the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are still talking about fighting around this sector. I believe the fighting is now moving towards Palivka already, due to this possible frontline change already. The Russians have also made some grounds in Stepove. So all these are signs of the Russians are making this serious push around here. And it's important to note this is a very difficult region because this is the war, there's a Ukrainian war around here. The Russians are also pushing for Kayamsky, and they are very actively hitting rear position, the Ukrainians in the rear position. FPV drones are now flying everywhere in the rear of Kayamsky. And this is definitely signs that the Russians may want to cross to the northern half of Kayamsky and start to put pressure on Stepnohurst, which is actually the regional HQ. Most likely is the regional HQ for the Ukrainians in these positions. This is where they send out troops to the front lines to die. So this is the situation in this sector. The other major offensive operations is over in the Vereshna front. The Russians are still fighting in the region of Kayamka. The Battle of Kayamka continues. The last report that we have is the Russians combination, the joining of the bridgeheads in the south of Kayamka as well as on the east of Kayamka, which is these two, where the Russians have appeared in the south, and then there's the other one. They then straighten the front line, creating a massive foundation for the Russians to operate in, to continue to attack into Kayamka. So that's the last information that we have of this situation at the Kayamka region. And we have interesting reports from the Russian Defense Ministry yesterday, where they mentioned Voronezh. We have never heard of Voronezh before, and I wonder if this is just simply shelling, or could this be an attack coming from a different direction? Maybe from Topoli. They attack from Topoli. That's also a possibility, because Topoli most likely is already taken by the Russian forces. Is already gone. And even Troivka most likely is under Russian control. There's a good chance that it's under Russian control because it's so close to the border. And then we have the pressure putting on Kayamka. This area is threatening to be a breakthrough region for the Russians. So the Ukrainians will find it very difficult, because it's basically a corner. If you look at the Ukrainian situation, this is basically at a corner. It's a corner of the entire Ukraine war, and which means this is going to be a difficult place to reach for logistics and everything. Very troublesome. And this is a bit like Sivers front. Sivers front is also very troublesome for the Ukrainians. So this is going to be difficult to to reinforce and resupply. And then we have also the Russian forces seems to be continuing to push in the south of Voreshna. We're fighting reported at Rakivka, Kindrashivka, and the Ukrainian mapping have acknowledged the Russians have taken back grounds at Zapadne, which is a sign that the Russians have resumed offensive operations in this sector. They have taken back a number of regions that was claimed to be taken by the Ukrainian side. So the Ukrainians now have considered that the Russians have taken back all of these places. The Russians have never considered that they have lost all these locations, by the way. So, but if the Ukrainians are accurate about their own situation, then this signifies that there's a crack. There's a massive crack in the defense line at the Zapadne, and the Russians are making a push for it. So these are the offensive in this Voreshna region. Another Russian push is over in the northern part of the Liman front. The Russians are doing a diversion the distraction over from Makiivka to Kharkivka region, whereas the Russian Defense Ministry announced the capture of Katerinivka, because this is where the main push is. Fighting is reported at Novomihailivka, and they are shelling the rear position at Kodok already. So I'm going to zoom in a bit. So the Russians are going for Novomihailivka, They have claimed the capture of Kateryniivka. Fighting is reported at Nove, and Rikodub is getting shelled. There's a good chance that if this is true, then the next report, the next time, the next SIPREP, because this is not SIPREP, this is conclusion. The SIPREP will be tomorrow, but the subsequent SIPREP, mention of Rikodub, we're going to put it as a fighting, as the Russians could now potentially attack from Kateryniivka to Rikodub. So we have to change our indications in our mapping. So this is all this is where the main push is. I feel like the push over at Kharkivka is just diversionary, which forced the Ukrainians to divert some of the forces to deal with this attack, whereas the main push is coming in this direction. So this is happening. The south here, there is some pressure building up around Yampolivka, Kolodziady, Torsky, as well as Zarishny. This could also be very diversionary in nature, as this would still divert attention to this area while the Russians continue to make the push. So that is still possible. And the Ukrainians, there is some news regarding they are not keeping up with training. They are unable to train troops fast enough to cover the reinforcement they needed to keep up the battle, which is actually projected in our models, where we were trying to figure out the casualties, and our estimation was 3 to 6 months. So by now it's probably 2 to 5 months, because 1 month has passed since we have done that analysis. So we're going to start to see the Ukrainians start to struggle more and more, most likely. But of course, things can change. There is things happening in the background that we may not realize. So you can also see geopolitically, you can see that the desperation from the Ukrainian side, and perhaps even on the European side, talking about sending troops into Ukraine. And the Ukrainians are struggling to do their best to entice or pressure or scam or whatever, to get NATO or European troops into Ukraine war. Because if the Europeans do not send in troops to Ukraine, we are going to see start to see massive collapse by June. We are now in April. In another 2 months, which is like the worst case scenario, in our projections, the Ukrainian lines will start to crack in a massive way. And if it's not, then it will be around September. We will see massive collapse of the Ukraine lines. I personally, based on gut feeling, not just based on the models that we have tried to do this, my personal opinion, the gut feeling is that the Ukrainians are not going to have enough to fight as well. So they may have some offensive operation or offensive units that they are trying to gather and bulk up, build up in the rear position, in the rear. They may have still some big force to do one final major offensive. I think that is possible, but that's just one offensive. You can't do anything in a big war if you can only do on one offensive. This is basically like Battle of the Bulge. That one offensive by the Germans, scary it might seem, capture some ground it might have done, but strategically that was the last ditch effort, which does nothing. Because you can have that victory. Let's say the Germans successfully, in the Battle of the Bulge, capture the supplies, that they really were going for in the fog. They managed to capture, some huge amount of grounds, but then they don't have the manpower to continue to fight. You see, there's the problem with the Battle of the Bulge is, yes, the Americans largely have, they got pushed back, but they managed to win the battle because reinforcement arrived. But the let's say the Germans won it, it wouldn't have made any difference strategically because they don't have what it takes. They don't have enough people to actually do that counter attack and push the allied forces entirely out of Europe. That is just not doable. Ukraine is now currently in the same situation as Nazi Germany at that moment of time, where they just don't have the troops. They can do one more final offensive, but it will not go very far. They might have initial success. the pro-Ukrainian crowd, the activists, the YouTube channels can have a field day, celebrating that massive victory for a month or two, and then everything will just go back to collapse, just like what happened in the Kursk front. It doesn't really do much. So otherwise, there is what else do we have? In the Velika Novosibirsk region, the Russians are starting to get awake again at Vasily, Balatske, Privny and Vinnypole. But the push is hard because the Ukrainian lines, the major Ukrainian defense line is around here, and the Russians have to spend a lot of effort shelling the rear positions. So I don't expect too much changes quickly in this region here. So we'll check back again in the next conclusions. Otherwise, yeah, Bakhmut, nothing much. Siversk. Interesting thing about Siversk is the latest geolocation. Remember I said before, the Russians is likely to go for a northern flanking operation. We have the latest geolocation to confirm that the Russians are still doing this. This big arrow movement is super slow, but they are doing this. They are still flanking north. So let's see how far they can go. This is basically kill zone. These are very dangerous places. The grounds are very empty, very wide. Like this advance alone is 1.3, perhaps even 1.5 kilometers. But then, let's say you entrench here, your resupply trucks or your resupply or everything have to travel that far. This the out or in the open ground, totally exposed to FPV drones. So that's going to be a headache. And also another latest geopolitical or not like macro situation is that the pro-Ukrainian crowd is suddenly realizing that the F-16s are very limited because the F-16s are so old. Is a C and D model or A and B model. I can't remember. So they do not have the latest radar, which means that they don't have the ASA radar. They have the older ones, and which means according to what the pro-Ukrainians are saying, this F-16 cannot fire longer range missiles to stop Russian bombers, which limits what the F-16 can do. Yeah, I felt like that's a pointless discussion, because let's say they have the longer range missile, then they go for the bombers. They will be exposed to Russian Sukhoi 57s, Russian Sukhoi 35s, which are all superior fighters to these old F-16 fighters. So they'll get shot down anyway if they try. So I think that is not a good way of using the F-16s. They should use the F-16, continue to use it as close air support, and also as anti-drone, anti-missile defense. They should not be using them to try to take out Russian aviation, because F-16s are these F-16s that is with the Ukrainians right now is too old. They just is not capable of taking down any Russian bombers. They just don't have the range, and they don't have the technology to do that. They can try in a suicide charge, then maybe they could, but then the F-16 will be lost forever, and that will be that will be a very far shot, because you need to go through not just Russian Air Force but also Russian Air Defense. The S-400 could potentially take it down as well. Yeah, so it's not easy. I feel like it's important for the Ukrainians to use what they have, their limited equipments, in the best way possible. Not going for some heroic thing that does nothing other than PR. That's not how you fight a uphill battle. You have to fight within your means. So otherwise, I think I don't have much else more. Oh yeah, let's talk about Kursk. So the Russians the Russians are still looking like they are going to go for the Sumy region, and so this push, they have announced the capture of Basivka, and the Russians have just made new progress at Kuyevo. The latest geolocations have shown that the Russian forces have finally made some advance in Goyevo in the south and in the west, and so we might see the announcement of the capture of Goyevo very, very soon. But this is like I said before, this is a very, very difficult geography in this region, very hilly. The snipers could be anywhere, and there's a lot of forest to hide. So the advance here is predictably very, very slow, and this will continue to be the case as the Russians try to push towards Gordonau, as well as they try to go for Oleshnya, which is over here. Oleshnya is probably not as bad, but as they try to go for Saki, yeah, but Oleshnya itself is already super slow, so going Gordonau will be super difficult. So securing of Guevo might be coming soon, as the grind continues, and the Russians probably gonna get there. So, and the Ukrainian Belgorod incursion is nothing but attrition situation right now. The Russians are just grinding away the Ukrainian forces in all the rear positions, and the longer the Ukrainians wait to do something, the more their troops will be grind away with artillery strike, missile strike, air strikes, FPV drone strikes, and the troops just achieve nothing. So they just sitting here and get killed. So like this geolocation, Hodak drone destroying armored vehicle in Mala Rybitsky. This armored vehicle does nothing in the rear. If you have pushed to the front line, try to push, maybe at least it's doing something. But of course, it also will die. Never the same. So this is just ill-fated. They have created another place where the Russians will now be interested to push in and create another incursion. And then you're going to be in deep shit, because if you have these two, then it leads to a potential long-range pincer on Sumy. So let's see. But of course, this is all protected by forest, so it's going to take forever for the Russians to reach there. And Sumy, you can see the defense line is super heavy. You can see this flashing one is super surrounded a lot, and you can see that the trench line is largely over on the western part, because the eastern part is either hidden by the forest or because of the forest. So let's see. This is the current general overall situation in the Ukraine war, and the peace deal is not going to work out. The Russians have been complaining daily about Ukrainians hitting the energy facilities, and I can 100% tell you that the Ukrainians are doubling or tripling their efforts to hit energy facilities just to sabotage Russia and America's peace negotiations, because the peace deal was to not hit energy facility. So Zelensky made triple efforts to hit it, just to scuttle the peace deal. So that's the situation right now. So no peace is going to come, and the Russians have no reasons to assert to it. And the currently Trump administration has just started a massive trade war, but targeting China. The main target is actually China. So given this situation, this bigger situation than the Ukraine war, I don't think the United States will be in the position to actually put any more pressure on Russia. So I don't think there will be a peace deal, and I don't think Trump will be able to put any more additional pressure on Russia for now. So anyway, thank you for watching. Press the like button, subscribe. This is the conclusion. Happy birthday to those birthday today, and I'll see you guys in the next update.